On my 35th birthday, my mother-in-law looked straight at my 8-year-old daughter and said, "Don't be like Mommy, she's a liar." Then my husband slapped me across the face in front of 27 guests. I stood up laughing. When they realized why, the color drained from their faces. I know how that sounds, like some viral headline dragging itself out of the internet to sell you detox tea and a manifestation journal. But I'm telling this because the slap wasn't the worst thing that happened. The worst damage came from the sentence before it. The slap landed on my cheek. That sentence was aimed at my child's mind. Once a kid is taught to distrust her own mother, you don't just move on. You either fix it quickly or you spend years paying interest on someone else's malice. My name is Claire Harrington. Yes, that's my legal name. No, it's not the one on my birth certificate. That's what happens when you marry into a family that treats last names like logos. I'm an attorney. I'm 35. I have an 8-year-old daughter named Sophie who is so polite she says "excuse me" to furniture. She's also the reason I didn't walk away quietly. Because when you have a child, you don't get to pick the easy version of bravery, you take the necessary one. That morning, my birthday, our apartment was quiet in the way expensive places are quiet. Thick carpets, flawless windows, that heavy stillness that feels like surveillance even when you're alone. Sophie sat at the kitchen island in her pajamas, shoulders tucked inward, trying to occupy less space than she physically had. I poured pancake batter onto the skillet. She didn't look at me. Not in a sleepy kid way, this was careful, calculating, the what mood is mom in and what's the safest answer. Look, kids don't invent that on their own, they get trained. "Mom," Sophie said at last, tracing a slow circle on the marble with one finger. "Yeah, baby, do I have to go tonight?" She didn't mean the restaurant, she meant Margaret, my mother-in-law. The woman who could turn the word sweetheart into a warning. I kept my voice light. "It's my birthday dinner. We'll stay a little while, then we'll come home." Sophie nodded like she understood the words but not the safety behind them. Then she said the sentence that hollowed out my stomach. "Grandma said you lie," just like that. No drama, no tears, just a flat recital like she'd memorized a fact for school. I stopped moving. Not because I was speechless, but because I didn't want my face to teach her that telling the truth causes explosions. I turned off the burner, wiped my hands, and crouched so we were eye level. "Did Grandma say that?" I asked quietly. Sophie nodded. "What exactly did she say?" Her lips pressed together. She hesitated like answering wrong might get her in trouble. Then she whispered, she said, "Don't be like Mommy, Mommy makes things up." "Did Grandpa say anything?" Sophie swallowed. "He said, your mother tells stories, stories." That was their favorite word for my reality whenever it clashed with their script. Such a neat little term. It sounds cozy, like bedtime, like imagination. Not like we're teaching your daughter that you can't be trusted. I took Sophie's cold hands in mine. "Soph, look at me." She raised her eyes slowly, braced for punishment, and I hated how practiced that expression looked. "I'm not perfect," I said. "Sometimes I get things wrong. Sometimes I forget things, but I do not lie to you, ever." Her shoulders dropped just a fraction, like she wanted to lean into that but wasn't sure she was allowed. Then she whispered, "Grandma said, if I believe you, I'm being disloyal." That word hit harder than any slap. Disloyal. They weren't just attacking me, they were drafting my child onto their side. Here's what you need to know about the Harringtons. They don't fight like normal families. There's no yelling, no door slamming, no screaming matches followed by apologies. They manage, they don't threaten, they imply, they don't punish loudly. They do it silently, precisely in ways that make you sound unhinged if you complain, an arched eyebrow, a concerned text. A deceptively casual remark in front of the right ear. They'll dismantle your life with a smile, then send flowers to prove they're not that kind of people. Margaret Harrington doesn't need to raise her voice to be frightening. She weaponizes tone. The first time I met her, she scanned me like she was guessing my resale value. Then she said, "Oh, Claire, you're charming." Charming is what rich people say when they mean not impressive. It's what you call something you'd never take seriously. When I married Alexander, Margaret never sat me down and said, "I'm in charge." She explained the culture. "We're a close family," she'd say. "Alexander needs stability. We value discretion." Then she'd smile like she'd offered sugar, not a warning. Alex would squeeze my hand under the table, reassuring. I'd squeeze back, thinking, he's on my side, he chose me. I hadn't yet learned that Alex had been trained to choose his mother the way you choose oxygen. Not because he wanted to, because he didn't realize there was an alternative. Alex isn't cruel in the obvious ways. He doesn't scream, he doesn't throw things. He does something, in some ways, worse. He stays neutral. He'll sit at the table while Margaret says something sharp to Sophie. We don't whine in this family, when our daughter's eyes are full of tears, and just keep eating. He'll watch Sophie flinch when Margaret touches her and say nothing, and if I step in he murmurs, Claire, don't start, don't start. Translation, don't make my mother uncomfortable. The first time I realized Margaret was working on Sophie, it wasn't some dramatic blow-up. It was tiny. We were at her place for brunch, one of those houses that smell like lemon polish and generational wealth. Sophie dropped a fork, small clink on marble. She froze like she'd dropped an explosive. Margaret didn't look at the floor. She looked at Sophie and said almost gently, clumsy. Not oops, not it's fine, just clumsy, like she was naming a permanent flaw. Sophie's face went scarlet. I'm sorry, she whispered. Margaret sipped her coffee. Don't apologize, fix yourself. Then she glanced at me with a pleasant smile. Children model what they see, meaning this is your fault. After that, the changes came like hairline cracks in glass. Sophie stopped running into my arms after school. She started walking toward me carefully, like too much enthusiasm might be a violation. She began asking permission before she laughed. At bedtime, she'd rattle off Grandma's rules. Grandma says good girls don't ask questions. Grandma says crying is manipulative. Grandma says if I tell people something you said, I have to check if it's true first. Check if it's true first. She was 8, they were training her to fact-check her own mother like I was a rumor. One night she whispered, Grandma says you get confused. I pulled her close. Did Grandma say that? Sophie nodded. What did she mean? In a tiny voice she said, sometimes you imagine things like you think something happened but it didn't, and there it was. Not just alienation, gaslighting installed directly into a child. If you've never seen that up close, it's chilling, because kids believe adults, they believe confidence. They believe the person who talks like they're holding the rulebook. Margaret spoke like she'd already written it. At first, I tried handling it like any reasonable spouse. I talked to Alex. Your mother is undermining me with our child, I said. He sighed like I'd complained about Rain. Claire, she's old school. She's not undermining you. She's trying to help Sophie. Help. Margaret never controls. She helps. She doesn't manipulate. She guides. She doesn't hurt. She corrects. And if you dare call it what it is, you're emotional. You're unstable. You're making things up. Then came Dr. Paul Kessler. He arrived in our lives as a solution. Margaret presented him like a present. He's exceptional, she told Alex, discreet. He understands families like ours, as though wealth were a special diagnosis requiring its own therapist. Kessler wasn't warm. He didn't ask, how do you feel? He asked questions with the same core. Are you compliant? He gave it nicer names: alignment, family coherence, reducing friction. But what he really did was train Alex to interpret any resistance from me as danger. If I set a boundary, I was provoking instability. If I protected Sophie, I was creating conflict. If I questioned why Margaret could say to our daughter things that would get a teacher fired, I was undermining authority. Always Margaret's favorite word. Sessions were always in Margaret's home office, always with Margaret present, always with Alex sitting closest to her. Kessler would look at me like a thick file on his desk and say, Claire, explain why you struggle with control. I'm sorry, what? You prefer your version of reality, he'd say mildly, my version. As though his client's distortion and my lived experience were two equal perspectives. He never asked Sophie, how do you feel? He asked, who do you feel safe with? And then watched like a researcher collecting data. Margaret watched too, eyes bright, waiting for the correct answer. The first time Sophie said, Mommy, Margaret's smile never moved, but her hand tightened around her teacup. Sophie, sweetheart, she cooed, remember, Mommy gets overwhelmed. Sophie's brow creased, then she added, I feel safe with Grandma too. Margaret's eyes softened in quiet triumph. And I understood this wasn't therapy. This was a practice run for custody. That's when I stopped trying to win inside their system. You can't win a game when the other side owns the referee. So I did what lawyers do when they can't afford naivete. I documented. I didn't scream or beg or keep asking Alex to see what was in front of him. I built a case. In my closet, behind a row of handbags I never actually liked, there's a shelf. Pull the third bag from the left and press the back panel. The shelf lifts. Behind it is a small fireproof safe. Inside, thumb drives, printed records, and a folder labeled HARRNGTON/KESLER custody. Not revenge, not destroy them, just custody. Because whether I liked it or not, that was the battlefield Margaret was dragging us onto. I saved every text from Margaret that looked benign but wasn't. Just checking in. Sophie seemed unusually clingy after being with you. I'm worried about Sophie's exposure to emotional volatility. Have you considered that your career may be impacting your ability to parent consistently? Consistently, another rich people word. It means you don't get to have a life unless it matches our aesthetic. I saved every email from Kessler, invoices with careful euphemisms. Notes that sounded less like clinical documentation and more like someone drafting a narrative. I saved calendar invites titled Family Session that were actually training seminars for Alex. And I saved the one text from Alex that broke my heart. Mom says it would be better if Sophie spends more time at her place. She needs structure. Sophie didn't need structure. She needed safety. If Alex couldn't tell the difference anymore, that wasn't a marriage problem. That was urgent. I hired Ryan quietly. Ryan isn't cinematic, no trench coat, no dramatic monologues. Just normal clothes and the habit of listening more than he talks. He was also the first person who made me feel entirely sane. After I laid out everything, Margaret Kessler, Sophie's new fear, he nodded slowly. This is textbook alienation, he said. The money stuff, that's just the engine, the control is the point. Exactly. Ryan did what I couldn't. He followed the paper. He mapped the patterns. He linked names to LLCs, shell companies, transfers. He traced the quiet machinery under the Harrington polish. The Harringtons weren't just rich. They were plugged-in donors, board members, people whose calls get returned, people who believed consequences were for other families. And when people like that commit crimes, they don't do it sloppily. They do it with spreadsheets. I didn't understand all the financial details at first. I knew family law, courtroom strategy. The money trail was another language. Ryan translated one night at my kitchen table while Sophie slept down the hall. He slid a folder toward me. Look, he said. Dates, accounts, amounts. He tapped a line. This isn't normal business movement, this is routing. I stared. Routing where? He exhaled. Places you use when you don't want anyone knowing where the money ends up. Suddenly Margaret's life stopped looking like legacy and started to look like a crime scene with impeccable decor. The worst part wasn't the fraud, it was seeing the shape of her strategy. She wasn't just trying to humiliate me, she was erasing me. She was crafting a story in which Claire Harrington was unstable, dishonest, emotionally volatile, therefore an unreliable parent. Get that story into the right ears, and she could take Sophie without ever raising her voice. If that sounds extreme, you've never watched a wealthy family weaponize concern. In families like the Harringtons, concern is a blade you're supposed to say thank you for. So I did the one thing Margaret never expected. I walked the evidence outside her universe. Quietly, I didn't burst into an office screaming, "My mother-in-law is evil." I walked in with a binder. With timelines, with documented patterns, and when you hand the right people a stack of facts, they don't roll their eyes, they write things down. By the time my birthday dinner rolled around, there were already conversations in secure offices downtown behind soundproof doors. Neutral voices saying words like wire transfers, shell entities. Money laundering, obstruction, witness tampering. There was talk of the Southern District of New York, talk of warrants, talk of timing. And Margaret, the woman who needed to choreograph everything, had no idea she was already behind schedule. When Alex told me, "Dinner will be intimate," I smiled. In Harrington language, intimate means curated, every person invited for a reason, every seat with a purpose, the room itself a tool. I spent the day the way you do when you know a storm is scheduled. I worked, answered emails, picked Sophie up from school, listened to her talk about a class project while my chest stayed tight. At one point she asked, "Do you think Grandma will be nice tonight?" "I think Grandma will be herself," I said. Sophie nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. An 8-year-old should not understand that. At home, she dressed slowly, changed her socks, changed them back, tiny anxieties disguised as choices. Alex walked out of the bedroom in a suit that cost more than my first car. He adjusted his cufflinks without looking at me, eyes on his phone, thumb hovering like he was waiting for instruction. I watched him and felt a strange kind of grief. I remembered the man he'd been, the one who laughed easily, who cradled Sophie like she was something fragile and miraculous, not a responsibility to manage. Now he moved like a marionette who'd forgotten he had strings. On the drive over, Sophie sat between us. Alex stared out the window, jaw clenched. The city smeared past in streaks of light. I concentrated on breathing, not because I feared Margaret, but because I feared what my daughter's body would memorize from the evening. Kids don't forget nights like this. They store them in their nervous systems. I was done letting Sophie's become collateral damage in Margaret's war. the private dining room at Hudson Yards sat high above Manhattan. The windows made the city look like a toy built for people with black cards. The staff smiled too brightly. The flowers were art-directed. The air smelled like citrus and quiet judgment. Sophie's hand was burning cold in mine. Margaret greeted us at the entrance like she was being honored. "Claire," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "You look lovely." Translation, you meet the minimum standard. Then she crouched in front of Sophie and fussed with her dress, not gently, possessively. "My beautiful girl," she said loudly enough for everyone nearby. "Say hello properly." Sophie's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Margaret's smile never budged, but her fingers dug into Sophie's shoulder. Sophie whispered, "Hi." "Good," Margaret said, patting her cheek, then still not looking at me. "See." She listens. I scanned the room like I'd scan a jury. Faces, posture, probable loyalties. 27 guests, I counted. Margaret liked numbers that suggested intention. 27 wasn't random. It was curated. There was Senator Whittaker, laughing too loudly at nothing. The sort of man who keeps the title senator like it's tattooed on his business cards. Judge Caldwell sipped expensive wine like bar rules were distant rumors. Several Harrington executives with polished smiles that never reached their eyes. A few family friends whose warmth looked very much like shared blackmail, and with a perfect view of our table as if the seating chart had been designed around his vantage point, Dr. Paul Kessler. He lifted his glass toward me, not hello, challenge. Dinner began, waiters glided, dishes arrived like installations. Conversations circled around investments, legacy, family values, all in the steady tone of people reassuring themselves they're decent. Sophie pushed food around her plate like the china might scold her. Alex didn't touch his meal or hers. He drank water and watched Margaret. I knew that expression. It was the look of a man waiting to be told what was permitted. At one point, Margaret leaned across to Sophie. "Sweetheart, tell Grandma what Mommy promised you." I don't," Sophie faltered. Margaret smiled. "Of course you do. Mommy said she'd take you somewhere, didn't she?" Sophie looked at me, confused. I understood the trap immediately. If Sophie guessed wrong, Margaret would purr, "See, Mommy confuses her." If she guessed right, Margaret would say, "See, Mommy promises too much." Either way, same verdict, Mommy is unreliable. "Grandma is steady. We're going to the museum on Saturday," I said evenly. Margaret's smile didn't flicker. "Saturday," she echoed like she'd just scored a point. Then to the table. "Claire is very ambitious. Sometimes ambition makes it hard to focus on what really matters." Her hand drifted to her chest like she was so terribly worried. The polite hum of agreement that followed told me exactly what kind of room this was. This wasn't a birthday dinner. It was a deposition with a tasting menu. Halfway through, Margaret tapped her glass. The room fell silent with the reflexive obedience money trains into people. "My dear friends," she began. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate Claire tonight." She turned toward me. 35, she said like she was announcing a prognosis, gentle laughter. Her eyes slid to Sophie. "And this," she said warmly, "is our little Sophie, 8 years old, the future." Sophie's spine stiffened. Margaret extended a hand, palm up, summoning, "Sophie. Come here, sweetheart." Sophie looked to me. I gave her a small nod. "I'm here, go ahead." She walked over, stopping just within reach. Margaret set a hand on her back, "Ownership, not comfort." "Now, Sophie," Margaret said, beaming at the room, "you remember what we talked about. Tell everyone what Grandma told you." Sophie went pale. "Grandma said," her voice shook. Margaret's hand pressed into her back. Sophie flinched. "Go on," Margaret murmured. Sophie's eyes darted to mine again. Margaret didn't wait. She pivoted Sophie slightly toward me like positioning a prop. "Don't be like Mommy," she announced. A few guests let out uncertain chuckles. Margaret's smile brightened. "She's a liar." The room snapped from chatter to stillness. Not outraged stillness, more like attention sharpening. The show had begun. Heat surged up my neck. My fingers went numb. Sophie stood motionless like the floor had turned to thin ice. I began to stand. "Margaret," she lifted one manicured finger without even looking at me, and everyone let that be enough. They watched her silence me, because when people like Margaret speak, rooms like this listen. Alex's chair scraped. He rose. I knew that sound. I'd heard it after late-night sessions with Kessler. After quiet talks with Margaret, it was the sound of Alex sliding into the version of himself they'd built. He didn't look at Sophie. He didn't look at me like a husband. He looked at me like a problem to be managed. "Claire," he said, loud enough for the room, "why don't you tell everyone the truth for once?" My lungs stalled. "You've been lying," he continued, voice taut, rehearsed, "about money, about where you go, about what you tell Sophie." I stared at him. His eyes had that distant, glazed focus, not drunk. Programmed, Alex, I said quietly. Stop. Margaret's gaze stayed locked on my face. Kessler leaned back, watching like a man enjoying his favorite episode. Alex's jaw clenched. Then he did exactly what they'd groomed him to do. He stepped forward and slapped me. It wasn't cinematic, it was worse, real. My ears rang, my face burned. For a second my brain lagged behind my body. Then behind me I heard Sophie's sharp little gasp. That sound, the moment a child discovers the adults can hurt each other, hurt more than the blow. Almost more. I touched my cheek, no blood. Just heat, just evidence. 27 people had seen Margaret bait him, 27 had watched him comply, and that was when I did the one thing Margaret hadn't planned for. I laughed. Not hysterically, not wildly, a low, disbelieving chuckle like I'd finally found the last piece of a puzzle I'd been working for years. Margaret blinked. Alex froze like he'd snapped awake in the middle of someone else's dream. Someone whispered, "What the?" I stood, smoothly. I adjusted my dress like stepping up for closing argument. "Thank you," I said, clear and bright. Margaret's smile stuttered. "For what?" she asked. I looked around the room. "For showing up." Silence tightened. "You didn't just come to my birthday dinner," I said. "You came to testify." Alex swallowed. "Claire, sit down." I turned to him. "Oh, Alex," I said softly. I'm finished sitting. Then I looked at Sophie, still beside Margaret, still frozen, and I did the most important thing I did that entire night. I held out my hand. "Soph," I said gently. "Come to Mommy." Margaret's fingers dug into her again. Sophie hesitated. I kept my hand out, no pleading, no panic, just an open door, her eyes filled. Then slowly she stepped away from Margaret like backing away from a hot surface she'd been told was safe. She walked to me. Her small hand slid into mine, her entire body trembling. Margaret's face hardened. "Claire, you are not going to make a scene." I leaned in, voice low enough for her alone. "I'm not making a scene," I whispered. "I'm ending one," then louder, "Ryan." From a side table, Ryan, my quiet contingency plan, stood and nodded. He walked over with the easy confidence of someone who belongs because the truth says so. I knelt to Sophie. "Sweetheart," I said, "you're going to go with Ryan to Aunt Erin's, okay? Dad's sister, you know her." Sophie clung to me. "Are you coming?" "In a minute," I promised. "I'm right behind you." She looked at my cheek, then at Alex. After a beat, she nodded. Ryan guided her toward the door. Margaret started forward. I stepped subtly into her path. Not threatening, just present. Margaret stopped. She might be reckless, but she understood optics. You don't physically block a mother from her child in front of 27 witnesses right after your son hits her. The door closed behind Sophie. I turned back to the table and let the lawyer inside me stand all the way up. The part Margaret had spent years trying to shame into silence. The part that didn't sob, it documented. "Margaret," I said, "you were right." Her chin lifted. "Of course I was." "I have been lying," I said. A murmur rolled through the room. Margaret's eyes lit. Alex let out a shaky breath. "I've been lying," I continued, "about how much I knew." I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small remote. The art wall at the end of the room concealed a projector. It flickered to life. A couple of guests shifted, glancing at Margaret. A waiter looked like he wanted to evaporate. I pressed the button. Slide 1, HARINGTON Group, flow of funds, boxes, arrows, LLCs with bland names. Transaction dates, numbers that ended in more zeros than anyone likes to see labeled personal. A tidy little portrait of greed. Someone choked on their wine. Whitaker's laugh died mid-breath. Judge Caldwell's face turned the color of printer paper. Margaret sat perfectly still, like refusing to move would make reality back down. "You can't," she began. "Oh, I can," I said pleasantly. "And the best part, I don't have to convince you." Click. Slide 2, communications and instructions, text screenshots, email excerpts, calendar notes. Margaret's signature, concerned tone with very unconcerned intent. Click. Slide 3, Dr. PAULKESLER, billing and notes. Kessler jerked upright. "That is confidential," he snapped. I tilted my head. "Doctor, you bill like a consultant and write like a strategist. Let's not insult everyone's intelligence by calling this therapy." A few guests shifted, discomfort breaking through loyalty. "You obtained those illegally," he said. "Feel free to raise that in court," I replied. Then to the room, "Also, for anyone wondering, I'm an attorney." "I didn't build this on vibes." Margaret's nostrils flared. "Claire," she said crisply, "you're embarrassing yourself." Click. Slide 4, custody strategy narrative. Underneath, an audio waveform. I pressed play. Margaret's voice filled the room, cool and deliberate. "If Sophie starts repeating what Claire says, correct it immediately. Tell her Mommy makes things up. We need her to doubt Claire's memory. If Sophie believes Claire lies, family court becomes easier." You could feel back straightening around the table. This wasn't old-fashioned parenting, it was strategy. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another muttered, "Is that real?" Kessler's jaw clenched. Margaret's eyes flicked once to Senator Whittaker, a tiny, desperate command, "Fix this." Whittaker stared at the screen like it was radioactive. Judge Caldwell's glass stalled halfway to his mouth. Even people who blur the edges of ethics rarely enjoy being photographed over the line. Click, another clip, Margaret again. "We'll say Claire is unstable. We'll say she's alienating Sophie from Alexander. We'll say she's emotionally volatile." A pause. Then Kessler's voice, smooth and precise, "If Alexander loses control, it helps. A public incident would support the narrative." The air didn't just go quiet, it thinned like the oxygen had left. I touched my cheek lightly and smiled at Alex. "Well," I said, almost airy, "we got our public incident." The blood drained from his face, not remorse yet, fear, the first crack in his trance. Margaret let out a brittle laugh. "You're recording family conversations," she said, painting me as the monster. I shrugged. "My attorney advised me," I said. "Oh wait, that's me." A few people flinched. Sarcasm feels wrong in rooms like this until you realize it's the only thing keeping you upright. "You can't threaten people in my home," Margaret said sharply. "This isn't your home," I replied. "It's a private dining room with staff and security cameras." I glanced around. "And before anyone gets any ideas, copies of everything you're seeing tonight are already out of my hands." Margaret's composure slipped. "Who did you send them to?" she demanded. I let the pause sit. "The U.S. Attorney's Office," I said clearly. A ripple trembled through the room. "And the FBI." The ripple became a wave. Rich people don't panic about morality, they panic about jurisdiction. One guest shot up. "This is insane, I'm leaving." "Of course," I said mildly. "Just remember, leaving doesn't erase being a witness." Another guest grabbed his phone. I lifted a hand. "Go ahead." "Call your lawyer." I already called mine. "Claire, stop this," Margaret hissed. I looked at her, really looked. Underneath the posture and grooming, I saw it at last, not indignation, terror. Margaret wasn't afraid of disgrace, she was afraid of losing control. Kessler shoved his chair back. "You're destroying a family," he snapped. "No, doctor," I said. "I'm documenting the family you helped construct." "This is a violation of privacy," he said. "I love it when people say privacy when they mean impunity," I replied. Click. Final slide, witness list, 27 present, not all the names shown, just enough to make the point. I swept the table with my eyes. "Congratulations," I said. "You're all part of the record now." That's when the door opened, not discreetly, purposefully. A man in a dark jacket walked in, voice steady as a weather report. "NYPD and federal agents with a warrant." More officers followed. Badges, folders, the unshowy authority of people who don't need anyone impressed. Rooms like this are used to attention. "They are not used to this kind." The lead officer, Captain Donnelly, approached Margaret. "Margaret Harrington," he said, "we have warrants." She lifted her chin like it was armor. "This is harassment." "Ma'am, please stand," he said, unbothered. Kessler half rose, then thought better of it as an agent approached. "Dr. Kessler," the agent said. "We need you to come with us." "On what grounds?" Kessler demanded. The agent checked his paperwork. "Multiple. We can start with obstruction." Kessler's mouth opened, then closed. Gravity seemed to double under him. Senator Whittaker's hands trembled. Judge Caldwell stared at the tablecloth like it might offer absolution. One executive's shirt darkened with sweat. Another guest whispered, "I never should have come." "Yes," I thought, "that's the lesson." Margaret snapped toward Alexander. "Do something." He looked at her, then at me, then at the officers. For the first time that night, he didn't seem to know whose orbit he belonged in. "Claire, what did you do?" he asked, voice raw. "I protected our daughter," I said. "That's what I did." His voice cracked. I didn't mean." I raised a hand. "Alex, you hit me in front of 27 witnesses." He flinched like I'd struck him. "I don't need you to explain it," I said. "I need you to understand it." Margaret started throwing out names, donors, judges, people she believed she owned, wrapped in sentences that sounded like reminders and landed like threats. Donnelly listened with all the interest of someone reading yesterday's weather. People like Margaret think power travels with them like a designer bag. It doesn't. Not into rooms full of people immune to their charm. Agents moved through the room collecting phones, laptops, watches that weren't just watches. Margaret's jaw clenched as control slipped inch by inch out from under her manicured hands, and I felt something I hadn't in years, not joy, relief. The sound of a cage door finally, audibly, opening. Hours later, I sat in Erin's guest room with a paper cup of tea cooling in my hands. Erin, Alex's sister, stood by the doorway like posted security. She'd always been polite in that guarded way of people monitoring you for instability. Tonight her eyes were different, softer, furious, but not at me. Are you okay? She asked. I touched my cheek. It still throbbed. It stings. Her mouth hardened. He hit you. Yeah, I said. He did. Sophie? She asked. I glanced toward the bed. Sophie lay curled around a stuffed animal, her cheeks still marked with old tears, her breathing deep and even. She's here, I whispered. She's safe. Good, Aaron said fiercely. In the middle of the night, Sophie drifted into the room like a sleepwalker and climbed into my lap without a word. Her arms locked around my waist. She didn't cry. She just held on like I might evaporate if she loosened her grip. I kissed her hair. You're safe, I murmured. After a long silence, she whispered into my shirt, Grandma said you'd leave me. My chest nodded. No, I said immediately. Never. She said you leave when you're mad, Sophie mumbled. I hugged her tighter. Listen to me, Soph. If I ever walk out of a room, it's because I'm getting help, not because I'm leaving you. She lay still. Then her body softened a notch, like some part of her finally believed me. She fell asleep against me, and I didn't move. The next morning, I didn't post online. I didn't stand in the bathroom staring at my reflection in some symbolic moment. I did what I always do when something truly matters. I filed emergency order of protection, security footage attached. Audio recordings attached, documentation attached, witness list attached, 27 names, 27 people who no longer got to pretend they hadn't seen. With families like the Harringtons, that's what actually breaks the spell. Not emotion, evidence, Alex called once. His voice sounded like it was coming from a long hallway. Claire, please. I don't know what's wrong with me. I believed him. Believing him didn't excuse him. Get help, I said. Real help, not Kessler. Can I see Sophie? His voice splintered. My throat tightened. Not right now, not until a court says it's safe. Silence, then a small, broken, okay. I ended the call. Because you can care about someone's damage without volunteering to lie back down on the altar for them. A week later, Sophie asked a question so quietly I almost missed it. Mom, yeah, baby, am I bad? Every muscle in my body went tight. No, why would you think that? She stared at her hands. Grandma said if I love you more than Dad, I'm disloyal. Disloyal again. That leash dressed up as a virtue. I swallowed the kind of anger that makes you light-headed. Then I did the only thing that breaks a lie for good. I told the truth gently and over until it grew roots. Love isn't disloyal, I said. Love is safe, safe, she echoed like the word was new. Safe means you don't have to earn it, I said. You don't have to perform. You don't have to pick a side. Her shoulders unknotted just a little, like a plant turning toward a window. People ask me if I regret laughing. No, that laugh wasn't happiness, it was recognition. It was the second I realized they hadn't slapped me to break me. They de-slapped me because they were certain I would never fight back. They were wrong. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of being called a liar, because the truth was already up on the screen. Thanks for listening. If this story pulled you in, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? See you in the next.